so rich in literary, economic, and social history that it can be no mere setting or stage, but must be met as an active protagonist and provocative muse in our literary business today. This place and its inhabitants opens its doors and invites in from a warm spring day the poets who have traveled sometimes many miles to be here. And when the festival is over, this place will again bask in and enjoy its own familiar company. But for now, the festival is a literary drama with a cast of dozens. For each of us carries here not only our receptive minds and our poems, but also the places that inhabit us. And there are many: Ohio, India, Tennessee, Georgia, Moscow, Russia, North Carolina, New York, North Dakota, the Dominican Republic, Denver, New Hampshire, Willits, California, perhaps even outer space. Today we will envision, evoke, intone, and imagine circumstances, conditions, moods, ideas, and narratives, and lives, sometimes strange, but always of rich complexity. Newburyport's rivers of song have as ferrymen and boatswain Rhina Espaillat, drawn here decades ago, and Alfred Nicole, nurtured to young adulthood here. So we shall begin at this beating heart with readings by Powow River poets. Owen Gray will moderate. Owen, who inherited his love of reading from his mother, and who began his love of poetry in 9th grade when Miss Aldrich introduced Edwin Arlington Robinson's Richard Cory. Talk about a poem of place. Studying with Dana Goya at Northeastern University led to Westchester Poetry Conference, to Rhina Espaillat, and to an invitation from the Powows to join them. The Powows, which happened in 2012, and included his poems in their second Powow River Poetry Anthology published in 2019. Having recently organized celebratory readings of Jane Kenyon for her poetry for the Powows, it is most apt that Owen Gray moderate the 2023 Breakfast with the Poets.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Zara. I have the pleasure of introducing 5 poets who I know personally and have worked with in workshops and learned from over the years. Some audiences know Al Basile as a singer, songwriter, and cornet player. Others know him as a playwright, and still others know him as a poet. He has produced 19 solo albums, several verse audio plays, and published 3 books of poems. He's been nominated for 8 Blues Music Awards, and his audio play, Flash Blind, won a silver award at the Here Now National Audio Drama Festival. He also hosts the program Poems On, a monthly Poets in Conversation program on Zoom. But he doesn't call himself a podcaster. Yet. It's coming. As Zara said, I met Al at the Westchester Poetry Conference in 2012. During an afternoon between sessions, we talked about contemporary verse, and I still remember to this day the lessons about form and lyricism that he taught me that afternoon. And I was very happy to reconnect with him when he joined the Powow River Poets in 2020. Al's latest book, Solos, is wide-ranging in its subject matter. It covers the life of a touring musician, pithy proverb-like poems, meditations on spirituality, aging, and family, and includes 2 long-form verse narratives. The book demonstrates his tremendous range, with poems ranging from the 2-liner How It Happens to the 40-page fantasy epic Fearless. I know, right? His love of music, His lyricism and his dry wit are present throughout. Please join me in welcoming Al Basile to the stage.
Thank you, Owen. Thanks to the Literary Festival for having me and giving me a chance to read, and thanks to the library for giving us a place to have that happen. As you'll see, well, they're letting me go first, so imagine in a whole day of poetry, I get to go first. I get an audience with the freshest ears imaginable. So I'm very grateful for that. As you'll see, I very often write about things that happen in my own life, and so I'm going to begin with something that happened a little over 50 years ago in Rome. It's called Ancient Roman, 1972. Dressed in the black of my Sicilian aunts, imperious as 85 can be, she sat in an eternal city haunt, warm to the task of educating me. I'm purebred Roman. We go back, she said fiercely, 2,000 years, unbroken line, my family. Pride held up her ancient head. Her voice was thin, but certain. In the time of emperors. She sat back satisfied and peered up at me, who looked like a local but sounded like L'America. She tried to gauge my worth, my lineage the focal point. And you, where were your people from? She slyly asked and turned a practiced eye to stare up as I squinted from the sun full on my face. Awaiting my reply, she sat, a judge, complacent in the shade. My father was Bruzzese near Calderone. My mother was Sicilian, I said. She wrinkled up a grin. Ah, minestrone. Well, so I was soup in Rome 50-odd years ago. Much has happened since then. All of the poems I'm going to read today are from solos, by the way, which I'm assured is somewhere over there. This one's called How I Learned About Attraction. A button and an acorn and 2 washers. A piece of yarn I found under the couch. I saved them all for my experiment. I got a broken radio and pried the magnet from behind the speaker cone. Put it near my compass. It went haywire. It stuck to parts of the refrigerator door, but fell off other parts. I tried a nail that stuck to it, then one that didn't. The button and the other stuff did nothing. Food and drink like milk were not affected. Thumbtacks, it picked up, but push pins, no. Nothing I did could change what it attracted or what it wouldn't. That was magnetism. I accepted it for what it was. Later, when I went to school, some kids I liked and wanted to be near, but most of them had no effect on me at all. And of the ones I liked, some acted just as if they were a button or an acorn. To some who liked me, I was only yarn. I didn't see a similarity to how it was when nails met up with magnets. Then my experiments with love took over. I came up with a lot of reasons why this one I wanted couldn't love me back, while that one couldn't make me feel a twinge. As a kid, I'd learned about attraction. That mystery you just had to accept. But when I grew up, I forgot I knew it. Thanks. I'm going to get even a little more serious now. This one is, it's certainly autobiographical, but more than that, it's really confessional. And it's been many years since my last confession. This one is called Too Green. Too Green. She left me for the man she was to marry years later. Truth is, I drove her away. Her love for me had never been in question. I read the notice of her death today. We hadn't passed a word in 40 years. They'd moved to Florida, opened a stable with a riding school. They taught dressage, 3-day eventing. Passions she was able to build a life around, and with a man who shared them. All were gifts I couldn't give. I imagine she was better off. But there had been a life for us to live in love together in that distant time when we were both deciding a direction, 5 years out of our youth, discovering the depth and quality of our connection. And we were innocent of how we could be changed in ways we'd never known before, when we'd awarded with the name of love strong feeling. This was different and more. We found ourselves buoyed by each other's presence, which seemed always immediate and here. But suddenly, we'd breathed each other in, and we were easy in the atmosphere. So we renumbered days together from the first appearance of love's true expression. Gradually, we trusted in the future. There seemed to be no end to the progression. I joined a band that traveled every day, and there were women listening every night, dancing at our feet and smiling up to catch my eye. I knew it wasn't right, but there was a lure in the unknown and a new unknown tomorrow night. The thought made me somehow unsatisfied with what I had compared to what I might. So when she asked if we could live together, I held back and used a lot of words I didn't mean to keep her on the string. But what she wanted wasn't what she heard. I wasn't honest. I was immature. But knowing I would not be otherwise for who knew how much time to come, I was a coward to content myself with lies. And then she told me she had taken up with someone else to shock me. I could feel the chill that numbed me to her hidden plea. And so I let us drift out of the real. I learned years later how she must have felt when I was finally ready for forever. Another woman got to play my role and show me why we couldn't be together. Once on our road, we can't be anywhere but where we are. If we could jump ahead or go back a little, we could make levels of readiness match up. Instead, despite our efforts and our will, we often appear to be in step, but only for a little while. Too green, my love was not enough, although I wish it had been more. So blame's beside the point. I couldn't have been otherwise. But shame's still in the way, and there's regret for what I threw aside. I read the notice of her death today. It's possible I should have kept it light, but such was life. My last one here is called You Want It Simple. You want it simple, but it isn't simple. Some problems just have intricate solutions. Some will only lead to other problems. You want it clear. You find instead it's murky. You can have it one way or another, but you don't know enough to make a choice. And then it doesn't matter what you choose. Once you have your wish, it starts to change. It doesn't really matter what you know. When another person is in pain, your being right is quite beside the point. It's better that you listen and be present. You're desperate to believe in gods and heroes who work on your behalf and rescue you from evil. Yet you feel you're in the right to keep down those who only want the same. You want someone to blame, but not just one, but all on every side deserve some blame. And anyway, it isn't yours to say. We're all involved, and no one stands apart. You're hoping for a villain. That's not it. It's how the mechanism fits together with every one of us a moving part, affecting and affected by each other. You want it to be simple. Here it is. Humble yourself before your ignorance. Don't rush to judge before you understand. And learn to live despite uncertainty. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Al. I'd like to take a moment before I introduce the next reader to remind anyone who's here in the room to please silence their cell phones to not interrupt the readers going forward. Thank you. Our next reader is Dan Brown. Dan Brown is the author of 2 collections of poetry, Taking the Occasion and What More, and 3 collections of criticism, Why Bach, Bach, Beethoven, Bartok, and his latest, Subjects in Poetry. His poems have appeared in journals including The New Criterion, Parnassus, Partisan Review, PN Review, and Poetry. And his criticism has appeared in journals including The New Criterion, PN Review, the Hopkins Review, and the Harvard Book Review. He's won a Pushcart Prize, and his first collection, Taking the Occasion, won the 2008 New Criterion Prize. I first met Dan at the Frost Farm Poetry Conference in 2021, where I took one of his workshops that he was teaching while developing subjects in poetry. So I got a preview of the book before it was even written. Reading the book is like sitting with a insightful and very opinionated friend. The book sounds uniquely like him, and I swore I could hear his voice as I read. His passion for poetry and its subjects comes through on every single page. Alicia Stallings, A.E. Stallings, reviewed the book, and she wrote, with its reader friendliness, its distilled brevity, and its infectious enthusiasms, it seems destined to become a classic. I could not agree more. Please join me in welcoming Dan Brown to the stage.
Standing in the right place. There's a lot to consider here.
Bring the mic a little closer.
Bring the mic a little. I'll bring myself a little closer.
There you go.
Okay. So I want to thank the festival for inviting me. It's a joy to be here, privilege, honor. I'm sure I'm leaving out some words. And I want to thank Owen for that wonderful introduction. I was going to call that introduction generous, but actually the book is even better than he says it is. I asked Owen if I could make that joke. He said it was okay. I'm glad it turned out to be okay. So as Owen says, I'll be reading from a prose book called Subjects in Poetry. The book has a very brief preface which tells you how it's laid out, and I'll just start with that. Microphone. Down. Down?
And maybe a bit closer.
A bit closer. Is that better? Yes. Okay. Well, at least you heard the joke. That was the only important part anyway. Okay. Well, I'm supposed to hold this book up here. This is complicated. The subject of subjects in poetry is like a mountain you're standing at the base of. So huge you can fail to see it unless you look upward. This book is one poet's attempt at a lifting of eyes. Its first chapter ventures a definition of subject, a less straightforward task than it might seem where poetry is concerned, and applies it to a selection of poems. Its second chapter is a case for the value of subjects. You'd think such a case wouldn't be needed, but at a time when many poems are subjectless, I wanted to put one on the record. The third chapter is about working with subjects. It focuses on approaches I've found especially helpful and haven't seen discussed elsewhere. Perhaps they'll prove helpful to others, though I know better than to count on this. I almost said bank on this, but that would bring remuneration into a picture where it couldn't be more out of place. Okay, so now I'll move on to another excerpt. This offers a definition of subject in connection with poetry. An online dictionary defines subject as, quote, a basic matter of thought, discussion, investigation, etc. This definition is fine for most purposes, but one runs into trouble in applying it to poetry. It works well enough for a poem like, say, Alfred Lord Tennyson's little classic, The Eagle. He clasps the crag with crooked hands, close to the sun in lonely lands, ringed with the azure world he stands. The wrinkled sea beneath him crawls. He watches from his mountain walls, and like a thunderbolt he falls. The basic matter of this poem, not to put too fine a point on it, is an eagle. This subject sits at the poem's center, where it exerts a kind of gravitational attraction on a set of observations that could be said to orbit it. But what about something like, say, Hamlet's soliloquy? Is its basic matter suicide? Death? The passage is about both of these things, or to do fuller justice to what's going on in it, about the movement in Hamlet's mind from the former to and through the latter. If the eagle can be said to, can be figured as an orbit, Hamlet's soliloquy can be figured as a journey from thought to thought. The figure of a journey can also be applied to narrative poems. Take Ovid's account of the King Midas story. You could say that the subject of this poem is the wages of greed, but I'd call that its theme, not its subject. You could say that its subject is King Midas, but where would that leave the Midas story? Mightn't the subject of the poem be the plot of this story? When we're asked what a story is about, don't we typically respond with a plot summary? As Hamlet's soliloquy travels from thought to thought, so the Midas story travels from event to event. In applying the word subject to the attractor in an orbital poem and the path of a journeying one, we may be using the same word for insufficiently similar things. As I ponder this possibility, I think of an observation in Robert Frost's essay, The Figure a Poem Makes. He says that the importance of subjects leaves us back in poetry as merely one more art of having something to say. Something to say. Might that serve as a definition of subject? Among other virtues, it would apply to orbiting and journeying poems alike. A poem can say something in one or more of several ways, by expressing and or evoking and or addressing. In this chapter, I'll consider each of these ways of saying in turn, first defining it, and then looking at some poems in which it predominates. I hope to suggest in the process the vast range of possible subjects for poems. It can seem as if half the new poems these days are about the death of the poet's parent, if they aren't busy botanizing. As William Carlos Williams didn't quite say, no ideas but in shrubs. Whereas the poems in this chapter's transhistorical sampler are about all manner of things. As the shaking of a snow globe liberates a flurry of flakes, so a stroll through such a verse gallery may shake up one's idea of the sphere of subjects to where it's milling with possibilities. And my last excerpt will be, it's about the synergy between spontaneity and premeditation in writing a poem. This is a hot topic. Don't have this in my notes, but it's almost become a little bit of a shibboleth that spontaneity rules. But I'm not denying the importance of it, but I want to qualify it a little bit. That's what I'm trying to do in this section.
A little louder.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you, Matthew. Aspiring poets are often told to let the poem tell you where it wants to go. I'm all ears for the opinions of a poem of mine as to its path, but not to the point where I'm willing to discount my own thoughts on the matter. When it comes to determining where a poem should go, it seems to me that poem and poet should talk things over. The give and take I'm envisioning might be compared to the negotiations between a dog and its walker. Poem and pooch alike should be allowed to poke their nose into things, but both are on a leash for a reason. A good reason. And both are better off, for all they may balk at times, for being guided by a master. I sometimes find myself thinking of a poem's path in the larger context of any poem's eons-long journey toward being. A poem to be descends through a series of progressively smaller habitations, from universe, one of many, to galaxy, sun, planet, poet. At each step in this descent, alternatives less conducive to the poem's coming to be go spiraling off to their own fates. The trajectory of a poem toward its poet describes, in this sense, a kind of via negativa, a path defined by branches not gone down. This winnowing of ways continues in the poet's inner universe, where it takes the form of choices, from master choices of subject, should the poem have one, and treatment thereof, downward through ever more local choices from among the innumerable thoughts, phrases, and words that suggest themselves in the course of execution. Wouldn't it be a shame if, in the last few yards of this inconceivably long skein of natural and human selection, a poem were to be led off track by what Frost called chance suggestions? Yet, if a poet has a proper fix on a poem's destination, that is, not too good a fix, chance suggestions, far from being a threat, can be a boon in infusing the poem with richness and complexity and surprise, even as the precious cargo at the poem's heart is borne, however meanderingly, toward those for whom it was meant from the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. It is now my great pleasure to introduce a poet who here needs no introduction, Rhina Espaillat.
Oh, I knew this was going to be fun. Oh dear. See, first thing I do is break things. Dan Brown described, is it okay?
Get it more aligned.
Straighten it out.
Yeah, well, to the left.
Straight on your face.
Yeah, there you go.
I can't do anything right. Dan Brown defined the poet more or less in his very interesting talk about poetry as a person. But I want you to imagine that I am not a person but an ant. Because I am speaking to you from the two different types of people who exist. There is the ant who is practical and smart and determined to survive and serious and stable and so on. And then there is the poet who is crazy, happy-go-lucky. And well, you've heard enough of us to know exactly what I mean. Here is the poem, and it is called being the ant. And that's who I am today. Being the ant, by fortune, not by choice, I've learned over the years to do without the love reserved for that gregarious lout, the grasshopper. Readers approve my stance, but smile, indulgent in their cheap contempt as he plays clown for them all summer long. That's not to say they think my reason's wrong, but what is reason to a song and dance? To tell the truth, although I like his voice, I have no time for envy, having much to do storing the nest against harsh days from which sweet singers think themselves exempt. There are sorrowful nights, I will confess, when I would trade him all the dry, pure praise of schoolbooks for his place in the world's heart. But winning such a place is not my part. One has one's destiny to live, and yes, a certain pride in weeding the back lot, in paying taxes, standing on one's feet, creating order of a kind unprized by summer singers until winter comes. Yearly we make, like dance, the ritual moves dictated by our natures as by plot. He takes my bread, though I'm no easy touch, but not my tart advice. Fall closes up its golden page, I bar my door, his cup is empty, and the roll of muffled drums signals his exit. And the crowd approves. Do I regret my role in his demise? Well, yes and no. Let's say it's what I do, and what one does is what one is at last, as bronze becomes the form in which it's cast. Whatever might have been, by now it's true, if odious to the liberal elite. Being the ant is really rather neat. Just kidding, just kidding.
You drifted off the mic.
To think that I
And
used
more to
to...
the right.
I used to speak to whole classes in New York City, and I made them listen, and they heard me. What happens with old age? It's terrible. Thank you. Okay. This one is called, steady now, this one is called Bra. What a good fit. But the label says Honduras. Alas, I am union forever. Yes, both breasts, and the heart between them committed to U.S. labor. But such a splendid fit, and the label tells me the woman who made it, bronze as the breasts now in it, speaks the language I dream in. I count in Spanish the pesos she made stitching this breast divider. Will they go for her son's tuition, her daughter's wedding? The thought is a lovely fit, but oh, the label. And oh, those pesos that may be pennies and hard-earned. Was it son or daughter who made this, unschooled, unwedded? How old? 14? 10? That fear is a tight fit. If only the heart could be worn like the breast, divided, nosing in two directions for news of the wide world, sniffing here and there for justice, for mercy. How burdened every choice is with politics, guilt, expensive with duty, heavy as breasts, in need of this perfect fit whose label says Honduras. This thing hates me. It's like my computer. Well, this is a poem that's so old. The only thing older than I am, as I've always told all my friends, is the sea and the mountains. But this poem was written when I was even older than that somehow. And it's titled 65 because, believe it or not, I was complaining about such a small age, such a small number for a birthday, Why on earth would anybody complain of being 65 now that I'm, never mind. So here it is.
A little longer, please.
You want the truth? Disaster. How they flew those early decades. What I would, I might, or so I thought, sure of just who was who and what was what. But age has dimmed the light. Picture my neurons. What a tangled fright. All fitful sparks in memory's trackless fen, halfway to tabula rasa, blank and white. It's not a year I'd care to do again. My body hates me. And it's mutual, too. We never speak these days except to fight. There's less and less I like, it still can do. My bladder yells at me. My clothes are tight. I loathe these dewlaps and these jowls that blight the profile boys would notice way back when. I'm sagging gentle into that good night. It's not a year I'd care to do again. Those supermarket Romeos make me blue. Dim widowers who ask me to recite my recipes from memory. It's true, I'm touched by their wan smiles, and they don't bite, with or without their dentures. Ah, the flight of hours I danced away. But that was then. Look what's become of that young, rosy sprite. It's not a year I'd care to do again. Poet, you praised the ageless, hard and bright. You said this is no country for old men, or women either, and you got that right. It's not a year I'd care to do again. 65. Just think of what I could do again with 65. All right, we'll let that pass. Now this one, what is this called? This is called Idle Comments. Idle Comments. Better? Okay?
You want to move to your left, but you should stay to your right.
I'll have to discuss that with you later. Idle comments. Thank you. Thanks for your patience. After the service, when the neighbors left, breathing their last condolences like prayers, it startled him that he was not bereft. He'd enjoyed lunch, in fact, the last eclairs still on their sugared doily, rolls of ham, his wife's old cousin's gift of homemade jam. All hinted at the cares others would take henceforth of him and of his few affairs. Someone would look through papers, and the heirs would be informed. There would be claims to make and forms to file. His son would sell the car. He smiled and turned to tell her so, before remembering that she was much too far to hear his idle comments anymore. And I'll finish. What am I doing? Oh, yes. I'll finish with Passages, City Hall. And this is the book that Alfred Nicole and I put together, and that was so much fun. We began the day, you remember that, Alfred? We were sitting on the sand of Plum Island, getting our bottoms wet on the sand that was ocean rolling in and out, in and out. It was just lovely. But this is City Hall, because we were given assignments as to what to go to, what to write about, different aspects of Newburyport. A busy place where those who come will find passports and testaments, and on that broad high walls, neatly aligned, are wars. And to record their vast expense, these faces left behind. Look at their youthful smiles, helmets and caps and bygone hairstyles, worn jauntily with bravado before taps turned permanent, where further days were torn from them by grave mishaps. As if to map their passages, so brief, so bravely undertaken, here are the dates and places where the grief was hatched that left families, friends forsaken and mute with disbelief. From Picardy, Calais, Bois de Boulogne, that row never came back. Nor these from Metz, Luzon, and Anzio, those from the Mekong Delta and Iraq today or long ago. Busy, these offices, assigned to the care of residents to come, for whom they legislate, construct, repair. But these dead say, remember how, for some, no road leads anywhere. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for that.
Thank you, Rhina. Should I point out that the poem 65 was in her very first book of poems? For the
I'm sorry, is it possible to turn the volume on the input up at all?
The head librarian will have to address that. All right. The last two poets on the panel today will be displaying artwork along with their poems, because their poems come out of the ekphrastic tradition. That is, poems that are inspired by or describe works of art. How's that, Matthew? Good?
You're audible, it's just someone's.
Got it. Our next reader is Paulette Demers Turco. Paulette is the author of 2 collections of poetry, In Silence and Shimmer. Her poems have appeared in journals including The Lyric, Ibbotson Street, The Poetry Porch, Quill and Parchment, Loch Raven Review, and Mesochimene. She won the 2020 Robert Frost Poetry Award and earned a commendation in the 2020 Hippocrates Award Anthology. She won first prize in the 2019 Rockport Ekphrastic Poetry Contest, and she was awarded the MFA in Creative Writing President's Award from Lesley University. In addition to being a poet, Paulette is also a visual artist. Her art has been displayed at the Newburyport Art Association, and she was the featured artist in the August 2022 issue of Quill and Parchment magazine, which presented 12 of her paintings, 9 of which are produced in her most recent book, Shimmer. I first met Paulette when she joined the Powow River Poets in 2018. In the years since, I have watched as she has explored subjects of family life, family relationships, and our relationship with nature and place, as she's worked to master various forms and meters. You can see, any reader can see, the sharp eye for detail that she has in both of her visual arts and her poetry, and it's easy to see how one informs the other. Reading Shimmer is like sitting with a dear friend, looking at her artwork and her photo album, and hearing the stories, real and imagined, that accompany each. Please join me in welcoming Paulette Demers Turco to the stage.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much, Owen. So I'm reading after Al, after a lesson in poetry, and then after Rhina. So please, this is a blank slate, starting all over. And I realized I forgot to do one that makes you laugh. So, but Rhina, you take care of it, and Al, and Dan. I believe it's never too late to try something new. So there. And I thank Rhina for introducing me to poetry, and Newburyport for introducing me to art. I thank Kelsey Books for publishing my book, and Alexander Peppel, editor-in-chief of Able Muse, for writing a wonderful, kind introduction. Shimmer unfolds in 6 sections of reflections that resonate for me and I hope for the reader. The sections are waves, wishes, flight, float, beacons, and home. The collection moves across the day and the seasons. I will read a poem from each section. And Sarah Kelso, the head librarian, right here, will be forwarding the slides paired with each poem. My first poem is a triolet, the title poem, and the book's opening poem, occurring soon after sunrise in waves. Shimmer. Sun rays shimmer in the air. Time melts as foam-topped waves crash down on sparkling sands as on a dare. Sun rays shimmer in the air. At high tide, castles disappear. My child's towel becomes a gown. Sun rays shimmer in the air. Time melts as foam-topped waves crash down. Moving from waves to wishes, with indoor settings, I will read an oviejo, a Spanish form which means a tangled ball of yarn, with an epigraph from my 4th granddaughter, Adeline. Cast on, oviejo. Design a pattern. Use your wit as you knit. Don't count the hours, the reknit rows, dream, fingers, toes. The blanket grows, each knit and pearl for baby girl, who'll someday tiptoe, spin, and twirl. Soon mom will swaddle her in blue and yellow softness, knit by you, and as you knit, dream, fingers, toes, for baby girl. Now, from wishes to flight, I will read, how are we doing for time? Because I can read a shorter poem. Are we okay? This is the first in a pair of hymn sonnet. And many of you in the room have heard this poem before, and you might be able to tell that I happen to like butterflies. Mariposa monarca. In waves of orange, sable, millions lift, take flight aloft beside the ocean's mouth, undulating high, the swell, a gift above Quebec, Cape Cod, Cape May, and south. Then west, they feed and mount a Gulf Coast run. Their fragile wings glide high on thermal air. The Earth's magnetic pull, the setting sun, guide the monarch's wings. And if they fare above the plains to mountain crests, and whirs around the top warm, giant Oyamel firs. By Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, they fold their tired wings. In prayer, it said, then fall to sleep. Wade, branches bend, some break. From clustered clumps the mariposas make. On to flow, in this instance of wind. I will read After the Lightning Storm. Thunder shakes the air, the ground, the oaks, as bulging smoke ray clouds spew giant globs that soak the withered garden yellow sundrops. while jagged light from cloud to cloud now stokes fear among some families. We help coax them to a shelter with their beach bags, shops though closed, our havens till the lightning stops, the gusting northeast wind abates. Like strokes of brush, the late day rays are swept through mist, lighting clouds that fill the brightened sky with purples, pinks, and apricot and gold, while tall oaks appear as silhouettes in filigree, surreal to the eye, a bold celestial canvas to behold. I move on to beacons. The settings continue to be farther afield in this section at 3 lighthouses, and I will read the one set in Michigan. Orange sky on Charlevoix. She never could imagine this great lake, illuminated by the setting sun, bright as a centenarian's birthday cake, candles all aflame. This day's not done. This lighthouse water surface, cloud-filled sky, captures the slant of light for moments here, before the lighthouse beam will blink its eye, as if afloat, for mariners to veer their ships around threats hidden by the night. For now, the miracle of waves of light meanders through the surface's chill view without him, pleased to be among the few to capture this collage of orange red. It will not last, nor change what lies ahead. For my last poem, I will read the closing poem in the final section, Home. It's set in the rhythm, well, I won't tell you. See if you can tell. Well, I think you'll be able to tell by the epigraph. Sunset on Plum Island Marsh. Quote, I'll tell you how the sun rose, a ribbon at a time, but how we set, I know not. Emily Dickinson. Without a bow, the gilded globe has slipped beyond, below, the distant edge of this salt marsh, a silent, buried show. Its remnant rays illuminate a sky of cumulus clouds that drifted in, pure white for hours, above the summer crowds, now hinting rose and violet and periwinkle blue, reflected in the brackish stream, receding as on cue. Around the curve, a great blue heron stands regal as a king. A swarm of swallows just flits by, for insects on the wing. Red-winged blackbirds nestle, hidden in the lush green brush. All prepare for what will come, just, and then the hush. Thank you.